Yeah! Okay, let's get cooking!
Xiukai is a character that has an infinite scaling mechanic tied to cooking. This means that he is capable of gaining power outside of the ways that most characters do. He is weakest in the early game, but can become an absolute monster in the late game. He's primarily played as an ability-focused character. You can play him in different ways, but Amp is the most consistent and the one I'll be focusing on in this video. If you want to play Xiukai because you find his alternate playstyle interesting, but also intimidating, this is the video for you. This video is an updated version of the guide I put out back in January. A lot has changed about Xiukai since then, and I've learned more about him as well. In the intro to that video, I said I had played over 300 games of Xiukai. As of writing this, I've now played over 850. Skill order has changed. Because of that, combos have evolved, cooking routes have changed, item routes have changed, and there are new items to look out for on your opponents. You do not need to have watched that guide to watch this one, as this one will include all the information from that video that is still relevant. Right off the bat, yes, this is a very long video. This is the first thing I'm writing for it, but I know it's going to be long. I have 11 segments, not counting intro and outro, already written out in the outline for this video. To make it more digestible, there are timestamps so that you can click around and quickly find whatever you're looking for. Also, since Eternal Return is a game where the meta is constantly evolving, and for Xiukai especially, you'll need to adapt your routes and strategies as new patches come out, I will not be including specific routes or detailed matchup info, or a matchup's tier list. That stuff changes constantly. If you want that info, I have created a Discord for Xiukai players to share routes, strategies, and screenshots of people being salty when they win. The link to that Discord is down in the description, so if you want up-to-date routes or still have questions after watching this video, please come join us there. Xiukai's first passive causes all food and drinks crafted by him to restore 30% more health and SP. His second passive causes him to gain 1 to 5 stacks of Juggernaut Chef depending on what he's cooking and what level his passive is whenever he crafts an item that restores HP or SP. Each stack of Juggernaut Chef will give him 7 max health and add 1 damage to his ultimate. Xiukai's Q, Lost in the Sauce, is a straight line projectile with a wide hitbox that deals damage and applies a slow to the target for 2 seconds. This ability is best used to poke people from a distance before engaging, or thrown behind you when running away from somebody. Xiukai's W, Heavy Meal, hits in an AoE around himself, dealing damage and applying a slow that scales with ability level for 1.5 seconds. If the target is movement impaired when hit with Heavy Meal, they take extra damage based on your max health, and the slow is extended to 4.5 seconds. This ability is great to follow up a Q to make it easier to land E, or after knocking a target airborne with E for extra damage. It can also be used to help you escape by landing it after Q to apply a strong slow for 4.5 seconds. Xiukai's E, Walk It Off, causes him to dash in a targeted direction, going over walls and terrain, but stopping when hitting an enemy. When hitting a target, the ability deals a small amount of damage. If the target is movement impaired, they take extra damage based on your max HP and are knocked airborne. This ability is your main escape tool, the most important skill to land in your combo, and it gives you a lot of mobility, allowing you to loot quickly to get out of your weak early game phase sooner. Xiukai's ultimate, Burnt to a Crisp, causes him to throw fire from his walk in a wide arc 6 times, dealing damage to all enemies hit by it. The damage of each wave is increased by 1 damage for each stack of Juggernaut Chef. If a target is movement impaired when hit, their defense will be shredded for 3 seconds. When you have a very high number of stacks, your ultimate can turn a fight completely around or straight up kill somebody before they have a chance to fight back. In the late game, you pretty much need to have your ultimate available to fight, so if possible, don't use it if there's somebody waiting to third party you. An important thing that's easy to overlook is that all of Xiukai's skills cost health to cast instead of SP. Currently, my preferred skill order is to take 1 point in E right away for the increased mobility while looting, 1 point in Q, and then max W followed by E, followed by Q, taking points in your passive and ultimate whenever they're available. Currently, the base damage of W is extremely low without putting points into it, starting at just 10 damage at rank 1. W also gains the most damage per skill point put into it. Both of these things are why we max it first. Xiukai's E has had its cooldown increase significantly at early ranks, which is why we max it second. Lowering the cooldown on E allows you to get around much faster and makes you much safer. Another viable skill order is to first take 3 points in your Q and then max in the same order W, E, Q. This option allows you to deal more damage from a distance before deciding to engage or not in the early game. In duos or squads, it can be useful to put a few points into E first for increased mobility and safety, but personally, I still prefer to max W before putting more points into E. Skill order for Xiukai has changed significantly over time and could change again in the future, so be sure to join the Xiukai Discord in the description to stay updated on any changes. I'll go into skill combos later on in the combat section of the video. Like skill order, builds and routes change over time. Currently, Xiukai is played nearly always as a dagger character, so that's what I'll be focusing on here, although one of the top ranked Xiukai players has been playing a Lance of Poseidon build quite a bit recently. I'll go over some basic routing tips in this video, but I won't go too in depth on specific routes since they change fairly often. If you're looking for specific routes or want to keep up to date on the current meta routes, join the Xiukai Discord where we have channels specifically for that. In the early game, the main stats you're looking for are extra skill damage, sometimes referred to as flat amp, max HP, and movement speed. Extra skill damage will give you the most damage in the early game, while max HP and movement speed make you extremely hard to kill. Movement speed also allows you to loot areas more quickly, which will leave you more time for cooking. As you transition into the late game, your base damages will go up, making percent skill amp more powerful for you. As you gain stacks, your ultimate's base damage can go up well over 300 per wave, and percent amp will make it even more devastating. Defense and damage reduction are also very effective in the late game. Since you gain 700 max HP for every 100 stacks of your passive, a little bit of damage reduction will make you much harder to kill. Good inventory management and being as efficient as possible are extremely important for Xiukai if you want to reach the amount of stacks that make other players cry about you being overpowered in Gen Chat. For that reason, a lot of Xiukai routes will build items like Moto Helm, Sunset Armor, or Schrodinger's Box, even though they're not best in slot. They provide stats that you want, they're quick to build, and often easier to route than other items. This means that you can clear out your inventory and finish your base build quickly so that you can carry more ingredients and start cooking sooner. The best weapon available to Xiukai at the moment is Mount Slicer. It provides you with a nice amount of extra skill damage, a lot of cooldown reduction, and movement speed on your weapon slot. In some situations, Mount Slicer is even better than Fragarak, the dagger that builds from a force core. Fragarak will give you more damage, but the cooldown reduction on Mount Slicer is invaluable since you need your ultimate to win most fights. For the chest slot, I prefer Queen of Hearts, Cabana, or Commander's Armor. Queen of Hearts provides a ton of cooldown reduction as well as defense and increases the cap of your CDR from 40% to 45%. If you manage to hit the cap of 45%, you can lock people up for a very long time and bring your ultimate down to a 41-second cooldown. Commander's Armor provides you with a lot of damage through percent skill amp, and when upgraded to Cabana, it gives you a bit more damage and a good amount of defense. If you can't get Queen of Hearts or Cabana, defensive pieces like EOD Suit, Amazoness Armor, Battle Suit, Sunset Armor, or Mithril Armor are pretty good as well. For headpieces, I've recently been building Moto Helm on most of my routes for an early spike in power and safety. The health and vision range help you stay alive through the first night. Some routes do build Imperial Burgonet as it is a very powerful piece on Xiukai. If you build Moto Helm, you'll likely be taking another headpiece off of a body or out of an air supply box later into the game. Pretty much every completed headpiece is usable by Xiukai outside of Crystal Tiara and Laurel Wreath. If you're not capped out on cooldown reduction, Burgonet is an incredible piece as it provides a lot of percent skill amp, cooldown reduction, and even gives you movement speed. Crown is very nice, giving a mix of percent skill amp, max HP, and defense. Elysian Halo is a very good headpiece, giving a lot of AP and defense, but I would usually prefer Burgonet or Crown over it. Mithril Helm provides a lot of defense as well as a ton of CDR and movement speed, making it a very good option if you can make it or loot it. Tac Ops Helm is often overlooked by newer players for AMP characters because it has attack speed on it, but it also comes with max HP and cooldown reduction, making it a valuable upgrade to Moto Helm for any character. Helm of Banneret isn't my go-to choice for a headpiece, but it is an upgrade over Moto Helm, and if you're in a lobby with a lot of skill amp characters, it provides a ton of value in the form of percent skill damage reduction. It also gives movement speed and cooldown reduction, which are always good stats for Xiukai. Chinese Opera Mask doesn't have the stats you typically want on Xiukai, but it gives an absolutely massive amount of movement speed. So if you're lucky enough to get one in the early to mid game, it can allow you to zoom around and cook incredibly quickly. For arm pieces, I usually build Sheath or Dropnir, as they tend to be easy to pick up powerful pieces for Xiukai, with Dropnir being good throughout the whole game. From weakest to strongest, my preference for arm pieces goes Sheath, Dropnir, Mithril Shield, Scotty, Auto Arms. As with all of this, if you want to know up-to-date info on best in slot items, join the Xiukai Discord linked in the description. Mithril Shield gives a nice chunk of AP and defense, as well as movement speed, which tend to outweigh the benefits of Dropnir while being a direct upgrade compared to Sheath. Scotty is the arm piece that will give you the highest damage throughout the game, and with its recent scaling HP change, it makes you pretty durable in the late game. Auto arms will make you do a bit less damage than Dropnir or Scotty, but the defensive stats on it more than make up for it. They have enough AP to increase the base damage of your skills, meaning percent scaling it from other pieces becomes more effective, and with your huge HP pool, the defense makes you nearly unkillable. Tindalo's Band is also a good piece to pick up if you're lacking cooldown reduction in the rest of your build. For legs, I almost always build Tachyon Brace first because they have good movement speed, some defense, and 10% CDR, which is extremely valuable in the early game. There are some routes that build Straitjacket Sneakers. They're also a good option since they tend to build along routes with other amp items and provide you with a nice early game damage boost and SP regen. If you find yourself picking up pieces like Queen of Hearts, Imperial Burgeonet, or Tindalo's Band that give cooldown reduction, you might want to try to switch off of Tachyon Brace for Straitjacket Sneakers, Glacial Shoes, Mithril Shoes, or Hermes Boots, since cooldown reduction over the cap is wasted. EOD Boots tend to just be a worse version of Tachyon Brace for Xiukai, but now that they have trap damage reduction, they may be useful in specific situations, such as against an ISIL player, or a player you know builds a lot of traps for Final Zone. In the accessory slot, you'll pretty much always want White Crane Fan, Uchiwa, or Schrodinger's Box for the early game. Crane Fan is my preferred accessory to build because every stat on it is incredible for early game Xiukai. Extra skill damage, movement speed, and healing reduction. Schrodinger's Box is simple to build, provides the most HP on an accessory, and gives a bit of extra skill damage, making it a good early option. It does use up water and a lighter though, which are both important for cooking. If you can't build Crane Fan or Box on your route, Uchiwa is also a good pickup, providing the most extra skill damage on an accessory and giving you some SP regen, which will help you to stay topped off while looting and cooking. For late game, I will almost always switch to Revenge of Gujin if possible. Even with its recent nerfs, it provides a ton of damage in the late game when you have a high stat count. It tends to be a pain to route into your base build though, so I almost never build it myself. Veritas Lux Mia isn't seen too often on Xiukai, but with 10% CDR and only 5% less amp than Gujin, it is a very viable option if you still have room for more CDR in your build. If it allows you to switch off of Tachyon Brace for Straitjackets or Glacial Shoes, it can end up doing more damage than if you did have Gujin. Similar to Gujin, routing for Veritas Lux is extremely restrictive, so you'll likely only use it if you get it from an air supply or a body. When making a route, there are some important things to consider. Like every character, you'll need to figure out what food and drinks you're going to make in the early game in case you run into a fight. Xiukai doesn't use SP to cast abilities, but even with recent buffs, his base SP regen is only 0.5, meaning that you can run out of SP just from searching and crafting very quickly. Because of this, it's important to be able to craft some early SP regen items on your route to avoid being forced to rest, which will set your pace back significantly. You'll also want to consider what cooking materials you can pick up along your route. Finishing your build is first priority since you'll need items to stay alive, and crafting your build will allow you to get your passive to max level, which is when you'll get the most stacks. Usually you'll only be able to commit 1 or 2 slots to ingredients, so you want to figure out what those items will be on your route. As a brief example, let's look at this route and why it's useful. This route is the reverse version of a very popular Factory Chapel Forest route that Magnus, Shoichi, Xiukai, and other characters use often. Currently in the meta, those characters can race you to forest, and whoever gets there first tends to be the person who gets a lot of kills and snowballs. This route allows you to avoid that and be much more consistent. You start in forest, which means you get most of your items out of there very quickly, not needing to compete with other people who have already been there. You then walk into chapel and loot the left side boxes, which are almost guaranteed to be untouched by the time you get to them, since they're inconvenient to get to for people who spawn there or walked in from other zones. You then walk up into cemetery, and again you're looting boxes on the left side that are almost guaranteed to be untouched, meaning that they have a good chance of finding the items you need. You then go to factory and dock, where you can finish up most of your build as well as pick up lighters and oil, which will allow you to do a lot of cooking in dock. You can pick up water in cemetery when you go in on the left side to allow you to cook with boiling water if you don't get enough oil. After that, you go uptown to finish off your last piece, as well as you can get more oil, more fish, and make a lot of drinks in uptown. This route allows you to avoid a lot of threats while still getting online quickly and setting you up for a nice cooking route. When running a route, it's important to get familiar with the spawn locations in your starting zone. When you know all the starting locations and how to path from each one to get to the most materials, you can get out of your first zone much faster. I recommend going through your first zone a few times against bots whenever you start using a new route to get an idea of how fast you should be aiming to get into your second zone. Beyond your first zone, you'll want to try to loot containers that are less likely to have been looted already by other players, since they'll have the most materials in them. Good examples are the containers on the left side of Chapel and Cemetery. It's important to pay attention where other players are starting. If you see that 5 people are starting in Factory, and Factory is your third zone, you know that you'll probably want to start off right away moving towards the less commonly looted containers along the road and the top side of the zone. If you hit level 6 near some wolves on your route, feel free to hit them with your W and then ult them to kill them quickly. Your ult doesn't do very much damage at this point in the game, so you're not likely going to need it against a player until it's back up again. Killing wolves will also give you a good amount of mastery towards weapon skill and towards level 9 when you'll max your passive. Because your abilities cost health instead of SP, you should always start with your E and spam it as often as you can to get around when looting early. It will allow you to cover ground more quickly and cut corners or go over walls that other characters can't. Also, spending health on abilities gives significant health mastery, so this will benefit you in the late game when the extra health from your passive and health mastery work together to give you a massive health pool. Usually when looting, you'll want to wait until you need to craft to open up inventory spots to start crafting your gear. This is because it tends to be more important to get to loot containers before other players do, which will increase the odds of there being items that you need in them. However, it is worth stopping to craft items that give you movement speed, since the extra move speed makes up for the time spent crafting. So if you're playing Dagger Xiukai, it can be worth it to grab sticks and upgrade your dagger as soon as you can, since it gives more movement speed with every upgrade. If you plan to craft food like health potions that don't require bread early on in your route, don't hesitate to drop your bread for inventory space if you need to. You might even be able to come back and pick it up to use later when your passive is maxed out for more stacks. If you want detailed numbers on how many stacks you can gain for each type of food, check out the cooking tips channel on the Xiukai Discord. Knowing when to cook can be difficult when starting out on Xiukai. If you cook a lot too early, it can set you behind on your build, and if you haven't leveled up your passive, it also means you're not getting as many stacks as you could for cooking those things. Typically, you only want to craft what you need to get you through getting your build online in the early game, and hold off on cooking more until you have more points in your passive. Once your build is online and you have your passive maxed out, the best time to cook is all the time. Once your build is done, you should be committing all your time to gaining passive stacks. Hunt any animals along the way that you can kill quickly so that you can unlock your weapon skill, but remember that Xiukai scales in a different way to typical characters. Stacking your passive will make you tankier and make your ultimate do more damage. It also gives you a lot of craft mastery, making all of your items more effective. Once you have over 70 stacks and level 2 ultimate, you can take fights with players if you run into them, but you should focus on stacking up your passive more. As of making this video, I tend to aim for 150 to 160 stacks before I start looking for fights. Xiukai scales differently than other characters, but weapon mastery will further multiply the damage boost from your passive. If you are able to snowball kills while stacking your passive, your ultimate can get strong enough that you can kill people by hitting them with just one Q and then ulting them. Stacking Xiukai's passive is something that requires a lot of game knowledge to do efficiently in any lobby, so if you don't get a hang of it right away, don't worry too much. The more you play Xiukai and focus on stacking efficiently, the better you'll get at it over time. Eventually, you'll get good enough at it that you'll be able to hit 200 stacks no matter what zones go out early in a game. That on-the-fly routing and decision-making that changes game to game is part of what makes Xiukai so satisfying to play. Currently, my preferred zones to do my cooking after finishing my build are Dock and Uptown. I usually pick up at least a stack of 5 water and as many lighters and oil as I can. Of the lighter zones, Dock tends to be the least looted in the early game, meaning you can usually find several lighters there later into the game. If you're coming from Factory, you can get a lot of lighters and oil for heated oil, which can then be used to make fish cutlets with cod fished up from Dock and later turned into fish and chips for a ton of stacks and way better food than anybody else in the lobby will have. If you don't get a ton of oil, you can still cook a lot of things with boiling water. Usually if this is my plan, I try to finish up most of my build in Cemetery before going to Dock. Then I'll pick up a bunch of water, eggs, garlic, ice, and coffee. All of the ice you find should be turned into ice water. Because water is an unlimited resource, this is the most efficient way to use ice for your passive. Once you go to dock, you can use lighters you find there to boil the water you brought with you. There is a list ranking boiling water crafts in the Xiukai Discord, linked in the description, and explaining each one. But for just starting out, remember that spicy fish stew is the best use for boiling water because cod are an infinitely renewable resource as long as beach, uptown, or dock are still in. I would recommend that if you have garlic on you, or if you plan to go to a zone with garlic, for example, going to Temple or Alley to finish your fish and chips, you can make an inventory slot worth of hot ramen to turn into garlic ramen. Garlic ramen gives the most passive stacks per lighter used at 30 stacks per lighter. But by the time you start cooking, a lot of garlic and ramen are already gone from the map, so it usually isn't worth the time spent to make more than one lighter's worth of them. If you're using cod to make fish cutlets and still have boiling water, you can either go to Uptown to get more cod for spicy fish stew, or you can use the coffee and eggs from Cemetery and Dock to make Americanos and boiled eggs. When cooking, I usually try to hold on to the best few healing items and one slot of SP regen items for use. Anything extra, I either eat right away to keep my health and SP up, drop on the floor, or put into animals or boxes to reduce the likelihood of other players using it. The most important thing is to keep your inventory clear so you can hold ingredients and cook as much as possible, so don't worry about eating or hiding everything you make. After dock, I like to go to Uptown. There you can get more cod if you need it, and you can craft cocktails and lemonade with lemons, carbonated water, and whiskey. An important thing to note when cooking with Xiukai is that other than fish and chips, the quality of food you craft doesn't matter at all. The thing you care about is how many crafts you're doing. Never make highballs on Xiukai. They use carbonated water and whiskey. You can use each of those separately with lemons, which aren't useful for too much else, resulting in getting way more stacks. Curry powder can also be found in Uptown. Curry powder should almost exclusively be used with meat to make tandoori chicken, since meat is essentially an infinite resource, and other items that you can use with curry powder are better used for other things. Another common cooking plan is to end up in pond. It isn't as popular since spicy fish stew no longer uses carp, but if you know what you're doing, you can still get a ton of stacks. Typically, routes will have their final two zones be factory and pond so that their inventory is fairly clean by factory. In factory, grab as many lighters as you can, as well as oil, alcohol, and curry powder. Once you get to pond, collect water and combine it with the alcohol to make soju for some quick stacks. Then you can use the lighters and oil with the potatoes in pond to make french fries, and any extra lighters can be used to make heated rocks to make baked carp with the carp you can fish up in pond. You don't get stacks for making heated rocks like you do for boiling water, but there are ingredients in every zone that can be cooked using heated rocks, so they're extremely versatile. While moving through pond, grab oriental herbs and flowers and combine them into orchids. Use up any of the curry powder you collected with meat and eat the tandoori chicken as soon as you make it to keep your inventory clean. After that, you'll move to Avenue. Look for bottles to turn the orchids into healing potions, honey to make honey water using water for pond, and any extra bottles you find can be used to make bottled water from pond water as well. Milk can be combined with branches to make butter, which can then be combined with chocolate to make cookies, which are a very good healing item. If you don't find enough chocolate, you can also combine butter with honey, bread, or potatoes. There are other mid-game cooking strategies, but these two are the most common and currently the most effective. If you have questions about where to cook on your route, feel free to ask in the Discord. After you finish the steps of your mid-game cooking plans, where you go from there depends entirely on what zones you're still in. I'll go over some good zones to cook in the late game, but I highly recommend spending some time to study what can be found in each zone and all the food and drink recipes at least a little bit. Don't worry about memorizing it all right away, that will come with time, but it will be very helpful to be at least somewhat familiar with them. If you didn't go Uptown or Pond Avenue in your mid-game cooking route and those zones are still in, those are good places to go and do the same things you would have in the mid-game. Hospital has milk, which can be used to make butter, and combined with potatoes from pond to make butter fried potatoes. It also has ice, which can be made into ice water using water from pond. I tend to avoid going to hospital though, since ice and milk are usually looted out of there very early in every lobby. Hotel is a good zone to go to if you don't have anything else on you to cook with. In Hotel, just like in Uptown, you can use lemons with carbonated water and whiskey to make drinks. You can also collect any ice that is still there to make ice water using water from the pool. If you have lighters and cod aren't available, you can boil the water and then use the ice to make purified water. I typically wouldn't recommend going to Alley for late game cooking, since it usually gets picked clean of lighters early on. If you have to though, you can bring some boiling water to make garlic ramen and hot honey water. If you don't have boiling water, but have ice water, you can instead make cold noodles and use any garlic you find with meat to make bacon and garlic sticks. The same thing can be done in Temple, except you'll be boiling oriental herbs to make oriental concoctions instead of honey for hot honey water, so make sure you have a couple SP items on you if you're going there. You'll want to be careful in Alley and Temple, as people tend to go there to farm wolves and bears for rare drops in the late game. In Forest, you can make orchids as well as collect honey and eggs. Go to the water in Forest and use the water to make honey water. Then fish up the carp and use them with the eggs to make fish fillet with egg. Collect as much water as you can and either go into Avenue or Chapel to get bottles for health potions and bottled water. If you go into Chapel from Forest, you can collect more water from the fountain for bottled water. You can also collect bread to make hamburgers. There are 8 chickens and 3 boars in Chapel, so meat should be easy to get. If you weren't able to get enough water, use what you can for bottled water before honey water. Then grab milk and turn it into butter, and then use that with any honey you have to make honey butter. Unless you have no other options or need the SP to avoid resting, don't make cowboys. Whiskey can be used for several other things, and milk is best used for butter, since butter can be crafted into more food. There are other things you can craft in the late game, but these are some of the better places to go when you've used up most of your lighters and other ingredients. In combat, Xiukai has fairly simple mechanics. The main things you'll have to worry about are your positioning and when you should commit to an all-in. Xiukai is fairly vulnerable to being third-partied, even having boosted food, due to the fact that you will need your ultimate to win most fights. Because of this, it's important that you get console vision wherever you go in the mid to late game so that you can pick your fights carefully to avoid being third-partied or being forced to leave ingredients behind to run away and survive. Also, always eat when you fight. Your passive gives you 30% boosted healing on food you craft. That is a huge advantage, so make sure you're using it. Even if you don't think you need it to win the fight, it's better to end a fight with high HP to reduce the risk of third parties. All of Xiukai's abilities except for Q deal more damage and have an extra effect when used against enemies who are movement impaired. They don't have to be movement impaired by you, so if you third party a fight and somebody is movement impaired by another player, you can get your bonus effects. In team modes, you can also trigger these effects off of your allies' abilities. In solos though, almost every fight will be started with your Q. If you are much stronger than your target, maybe they're underbuilt or you're snowballing and have a huge stack count or wick buff, you can sometimes kill them just by tagging them with Q and then ulting, using the slow from Q to keep them in range and shred their defense. If you are stronger than your opponent and know you can burst them quickly, the combo you should use is Q, E, auto attack, W, ultimate. You can also get another auto attack in before you ult if you're sure that your target won't be able to escape. If your opponent is already down to 1/3 health before you use your ult and on a character that can't escape easily, it might be best to save your ultimate and finish them off with more Qs and auto attacks. If you need a bit more damage or just want to reposition behind your target before you ult, you can use dagger skill after E to empower the auto attack. If you're around equal strength to your opponent or you aren't sure how strong they are, you should fish with your Q while keeping your distance. Gauge how much damage you deal with your Q and decide how low they need to be before you commit to an all-in. If they chase you, it's fairly simple to kite them using Q to deal damage and slow them until you can turn. If they have gap closers or high move speed and get close to you, hit them with Q, then use W to slow them by 50% for 4.5 seconds. Then make sure you get far enough away from them that they won't interrupt your E, and then use it to make some space between you. Once you decide that their health is low enough for you to go in, just hit them with one more Q, E in, W, and then ult. If your opponent is too strong for you to fight, you'll use a very similar pattern to get away from them. Use Q and W to slow them and get distance, and then use your E to get as far away as possible. Ideally cutting through corners or over walls until they lose interest or a third party shows up and makes it too dangerous to fight in that area. Then head off somewhere else to stack up your passive until you can kill them. Ideally, you always want to land an empowered W before you ult. Not only will this apply a powerful slow to the target, making it harder for them to escape your ultimate, but it means every wave of your ult will shred their defense. This means that their defense will be shredded for 3 seconds after your ult ends. Oftentimes people will survive your ult with just a small amount of health remaining, and the extended defense shred will make it easier for you to finish them off with a Q after your ult is over. If you catch an enemy by surprise, either by having console vision or cameras, you can use dagger skill to engage. While you're invisible, your footsteps don't make any sound, so you can get very close to your target before they realize you're there. Opening your combo with dagger skill will make it deal the most damage since the empowered attack deals % current health damage. Follow up with Q, E, W, ult, and most targets will be dead before the ult is over as long as you have a decent number of stacks. If you catch an enemy by surprise but don't have dagger skill available, make sure you cast your E as soon as you cast your Q so that they have no time to react and dodge out of the way. I'll touch on positioning in solos in the matchups and final zone sections later on. For now, I want to talk about team modes. In team modes, your positioning is dependent on your team comp and how late into the game you are. In the early game, you'll often be playing the role of your team's initiator, catching players out and locking them up with CC so that your team can finish them off. While filling that role, you'll want to make sure your team is in position to follow up your engage. Also, if you try to catch somebody with QE in a team fight and miss in the early game, it likely means you'll be dead within seconds, even if your team is with you. Most Xiukai builds lack defensive stats in the early game, and with low stack numbers, your HP pool is not huge yet. Once you get a large number of stacks, your teamfight role changes to AoE DPS. The position you're looking for is the angle that you can hit the most opponents with your ult at once. If your opponents get so out of position that they form a cone with one in front, you can go in with QE on them and ult right away to just melt them. If not, a good strategy is to fish with Q for poke as usual, and then go in with E when you're sure you can land it. As soon as you land E, hit W to apply your AoE slow, and then dagger skill. Use the invisibility and move speed from dagger skill to move away to a good angle and distance to hit the entire enemy team with your ultimate. This will cause them to initially target you with their burst, but you can get out fast enough to survive. Then your teammates come in while you ult, and your opponent has already used a lot of their upfront damage on you. These are general strategies that only rely on Xiukai's kit. But if you're playing team modes, I encourage you to look at your team comp and think about what other combos you can do. Keep in mind that allied CC can be used to trigger your bonus effects. One potent combo is Hyunwoo wall stunning somebody and ulting them while you also ult them. The wall stun shreds their defense, and then your ult shreds it even more, making your ult and the Hyunwoo ult do massive damage. Another is Heart Ultimate. Xiukai's ultimate acts more like a buff than a channeled ability, meaning it isn't interrupted by crowd control. So if you're already throwing fire when a heart uses her ultimate, your ult will keep going. The other team won't be able to do anything, and the slow from Heart's ultimate means you'll shred their defense with every wave of fire. A lot of players dislike Xiukai because of his alternate playstyle. Because of this, sometimes people will decide that you're the biggest threat in the final zone, and you'll be attacked by multiple people and killed before they fight each other. It's important that you take steps to avoid this happening to you if you want to win the lobby. Your best case scenario in a final zone with multiple opponents is that 2 other players are fighting and you're able to come in and just ult them both to pick up 2 kills. So how do you ensure that that happens? Usually you'll have to spend some timer to make it happen. If you have a lot of timer left and there are enough players left that they'll have to fight each other even if you stay out of the 2 safe zones, you can wait in the red for a bit until you see combat pings or a kill notification. Once you do, that's your time to move in and attack. If they're both really low, you can simply ult them. If one of them is winning, target that one with your QEW and then ult them both. After they're dead, if there's another player in the other zone, they might come for you, so make sure to eat and heal up. You're vulnerable at this point with your ultimate down and having possibly taken some damage. If you need to, run into the red zone and kite them around until your ultimate comes back up. With the new final zone, you get a ton of free timer, so if you have CDR in your build, you should have enough to wait until your ultimate is back up for the 1v1. Alternatively, instead of doing all that, if your stack count is high enough, you can just sit in one of the safe zones and smart players will recognize how strong you are and just let you have it while they fight over the other zone. If you have traps, you can place them down at choke points to further encourage other players to go to the other zone. If this happens, make sure to watch the minimap closely and pay attention to kill notifications. Use that information to pick the right moment and use dagger skill to get the jump on whoever ends up winning while they're looting the bodies. If you follow this advice, you'll be well on your way to gaining lots of LP and making people angry because they died to somebody with 10 less mastery than them. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but I'll try to give a bit of advice on matchups for all the characters currently in the game. If you have questions, want more details, or want to know about a matchup with characters that came out after this video, feel free to ask in the comments or in the Xiukai Discord linked in the description. Also, this advice is mainly for 1v1 matchups, as the dynamics of a fight change drastically in duos and squads, and it would be impossible to give info on every team comp. In most 1v1 matchups, you'll want to keep your distance until you can all in. If the opponent is a threat to you and you miss your QW combo, use your E to make space and wait for cooldowns until you're ready to all in. Against Adela, try to stay out of range of her pawns until she uses up the queen. Try to force her to ult before you do, otherwise she will dodge most of your ult with hers. Adriana is difficult to pin down, but if you catch her with Fire Escape down, you can usually burn her faster than she can burn you. Just make sure you get out of any fire as quickly as possible. I haven't played the Alex matchup too much, but mainly try to wait until after Alex has used his melee W and taunt, as the W will force you to turn towards it if it hits you, as will the taunt, causing you to miss a lot of your ult. Respect the damage of her W. Do not walk into her W. It does almost as much damage as your ult. Do not fight her early game. This is one of your worst matchups at all points in the game. Late game, try to tag her with a slow and then ult to kill her turret and get her low. Then go in and chase as usual. Make sure you have an angle to hit her with E and not her turret before you go in. Get him low before you all in, because his shotgun does huge damage at melee range. Consider tagging with Q and ulting from a distance. You will need Crane Fan if he's stacking lifesteal. If she has Exodia items, she is very difficult to fight, but if you have enough stacks, you can still beat her. Be ready to re-angle your ultimate when she ults over you, and be aware of walls and other animals relative to you to avoid being stunned into them. Her W can ground you, stopping you from using E, so you might have to wait until you land another slow to use it after being grounded. Do not fight Crit Chiara early. She will melt you. She's a difficult matchup when stacking tank stats in the late game, as she tends to have a lot of skill damage reduction. Very skilled Emmas are a tough matchup, especially late game with item upgrades. Her hat teleport can pull you and force you to face the hat, causing you to miss ultimate waves. If you can get her when she's out of ult charges, you can burst her down pretty quickly. You really shouldn't be where she is in the early to mid game. She will eat you alive. Late game when you have stacks, you can beat her unless she has 20 mastery from killing everybody else. Then it's a 50-50. If she's AMP, avoid her early game and kill her late, where you can both survive her burst and hit harder than her. If she's Enad, third partier. Also, if you use your ultimate before she hits you with Charm, the Charm basically automatically tracks her with your ultimate for you. Either catch her by surprise with dagger skill engage and kill her before she can blink out, or wait for her to land fear on you before ulting. The fear will force you to move away from her and miss half of your ultimate. It has a long cooldown though, so once you've been hit by it once, you're safe for a little while. As long as he doesn't stun you into a wall, he cannot kill you. Be aware of your surroundings. Can be frustrating to chase. Make sure you have telephotos on you to drop as soon as he stealths, and to avoid face checking a bush with 10 traps in it. One of your toughest matchups. Her ability to heal when hitting a bleeding target makes her able to tank your ultimate, especially when she's playing dual sword crit. Dual Sword's Rampage can also shred through your health bar if she's playing AMP. Try to predict and dodge her Q so that she has to use her ult to make you bleed. Run away and kite with slows until you stop bleeding or until her ult runs out. If she overcommits to chasing you, she won't have escapes for when you turn on her. Respect her Q tipper damage, and don't forget that its cooldown gets shorter the longer the fight goes. If you get silenced by her W, you might have to wait to use your W and E, because any slows you had on her before might have worn off by the time you can cast again. I've barely played against him since he's not available in ranked as of writing this. In theory, his ultimate is dangerous as an execute since it does % missing health damage, and we have a lot of health. His ultimate doesn't force you to change where you're looking though, so your waves will keep hitting him during his wave. Make sure to kite off of his pools to minimize the damage he can deal. She can kill you before you get passive stacks, but it's a closer matchup in the late game. If she silences you, make sure you apply a new slow before using your E or ultimate. Be ready to sidestep her ultimate if you get below half health. Avoid him in the early game. Avoid him in the mid game. Be careful in the late game. If you don't dodge his Q in the early or mid game, he will kill you unless you have a wall to escape over. Wait until you dodge his Q or after he uses it to jump to you to go over a wall, or he will just follow you over. Currently not a difficult matchup, but try to avoid having a wall to his left when fighting him to deny him his stun. If you stand directly on top of him while ulting, he can bat skill you away and ride his bike into the sunset. A fellow infinite scaler. Very difficult to fight in the late game if she's been stacking her passive correctly. It's important that you close the gap and get in on her quickly. If she's using crossbow, be ready to ult as soon as you get in on her. She will likely crossbow skill you away, but if you're already ulting, you will still be hitting her with it. Wait for her to use her E vault ability to ult. It gives her iframes that she can use to dodge a lot of it. Her ult deals max HP damage and can be a threat if she has a lot of mastery. If you want to fight her, be ready to knock her airborne after she ults you so that she can't fully stack it up for the reduced cooldown and extra damage. Alternatively, bait her ultimate out and fight her after she misses it. This matchup is a ping check for the Xiukai and a stack plus ultimate aiming check for you. I try to run routes that either beat Xiukai to forest and kill him before he finishes his weapon, or that avoid him and go to his zones just before he gets there to slow him down. He runs out of steam after using ult, so if you can survive that, you should beat him. Just don't stand in the middle of his ultimate and attack him. Get out of it and then ult him when he can't just blink around to dodge it. If you see her early game, you're already dead. If you can go over walls and change direction, it can force her to lose a lot of speed on bike to follow you, and you might be able to get away, but in some zones, there is no escape. In the mid to late game, it can be a tough matchup. Keep her tire in mind and be ready to dodge it. Don't walk in a predictable pattern when moving away, because if she lands a long-range tire, she can get right back on her bike. When you ult, also be ready to dodge her tire, as she can use it to push you back and then get on bike and just ride away. If you catch her out, you need to ult quickly before she can get on her bike because you have no way to stop her running other than killing her. This is a skill matchup. Sisela is able to dodge a lot of your ult using her bubble. She can also pull you away from her, which will force you to look away and miss more waves. She can output a lot of damage, and her passive makes her hard to kill if you don't burst her. Try to chip her down to around half health and force her to use bubble before you ult so that you can finish her quickly and avoid the massive regen and damage she gains at low HP. Another matchup that I haven't seen too often at higher ranks. She can shield herself to become unstoppable and interrupt your CC combo, which can be a problem. Fighting her usually takes a long time, which puts you both at risk of third parties, so often fighting her outside the final zone is avoided by both parties. The fight comes down to how well you can dodge her Qs while landing yours. This guy is just busted OP. The mirror matchup is tough when fighting a Xiukai of similar skill with a similar stack count. Usually whoever lands knockup and ults first wins. Having healing reduction can also win you the fight. Less of an issue since Dobak nerf, but still a threat. Crit Yuki can dish out a lot of damage if he hits the crits, and Amp Dual Swords Rampage can melt your health bar extremely quickly if both casts land. Try to save Dagger skill for when Yuki ults and attack him with it to teleport behind him and dodge the ult. Not a very popular character in high rank, but his damage output can be very high if he lands all of his skill shots. You have a big hitbox, so it can be difficult to dodge. Recently, Zahirs have been building a lot of HP, so they can be kinda tough to burst in the early game, but they should melt pretty quickly if you land E-knock up on them in the late game. That should be more than enough information to get you started on Xiukai. The rest will come with experience. Eternal Return is a fantastic game that rewards you for the time you put into it, so the more you play a character, the better you'll get at them. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you at all, please leave a like, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below or join the Xiukai Discord server linked in the description. I'll be releasing videos explaining specific Xiukai routes in the future, so make sure to subscribe so you can catch those. I also stream regularly at twitch.tv/primesubtome, where I host the Eternal Return Duos series. Every Saturday, we hold qualifier games for a Duos tournament, and then on the last Saturday of the month, all the teams that qualified go up against the champions from the previous month. It's a lot of fun to cast, and some of the best competitive Duos games you can find. You've got all you need to know. Go on. Get out onto Lumi Island and get cooking.